You're listening to The Pilot's Portfolio, formerly called the Pilot Money Podcast. To learn more about the name change, join us in Season 2.
Look, if you fly airlines and you don't fly GA or military, most insurers will be just fine. But if you fly GA or military in addition to your airline flying, then we're going to need to find an insurer that doesn't have an exclusion for that. Otherwise, you're probably going to get hit over the head for your military and your GA flying in the way of higher premiums.
You're listening to the Pilot Money Podcast, the show dedicated to guiding professional pilots towards a future of financial success and stability. Fly along with your host, Timothy P. Pope, as he provides financial planning insights and answers to your burning questions and dives into real-life stories from fellow pilots who share their successes and cautionary tales. The Pilot Money Podcast takes off now.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Pilot Money Podcast. We are so excited for you to be joining us on this episode. My name is Timothy P. Pope, certified financial planner, specializing in the planning needs of the professional pilot. This podcast is for you, the pilot at home listening. We have invited you to send us your questions to pilotmoneypodcast@ceterainvestors.com, and you've done so. And we love doing these Q&A episodes because this lets us know what is top of mind for you. We know as you fly around, you're hearing a lot of things in the flight deck. There's a lot of information on the internet, and so it can be confusing. So we love the fact that you're sending us your questions and we get to answer these questions for you on the show. So joining us in the studio, we have Lacey. She's going to tee up these questions. We're going to run through these. And let's go.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Okay. So the first one is from Gunnar, and he has a question about long-term outlook for a military aviator. So he says, "Good evening. I just found your podcast a few days ago, and my wife and I really enjoy it. I am currently active duty in the Navy, flying the P-8 and have 6.5 years left in my contract. My wife and I are always trying to find ways to optimize our finances for the long term, and we have found your podcast to be the most relatable to our circumstances. We are debt-free, and we both have a Roth that gets maxed out every year and also receive the 5% match to the TSP. We also have a daughter that we are starting a 529 for. As of now, we are able to save approximately 50% of our income. We are a single income household, and we will likely be saving more than that after I get promoted next month. Our goal is to save all of our money between now and when I get out of the military to purchase a home, hopefully outright. By my calculations, we should have close to $300,000 saved in cash by then. My thought process is this. Our annual spending is $50K a year, and $26K of that is rent. If by the time I get out of the military, I can cut our annual expenses in half. By doing this, it will be a much easier pay transition starting out at an airline while also maintaining our current lifestyle and maxing out our Roth IRAs. And is this a smart decision? And what would you do in this situation? Thank you, Gunnar." Well, that's goals for me right there. To pay a house out in cash, that would be awesome.
That would be awesome, right? Just to, boom, go ahead, stroke the check, pay that off. And there's a lot of things I want to give Gunnar a shout out for. So number one, he's thinking ahead. Number two, him and his wife are doing this together. So this is a joint activity. They're thinking about optimizing their finances. Another thing I want to give a shout out is he said that they are debt-free. And they're saving about 50% of their income. Wow, that's incredible. And they're doing it on a single income, right? So, if we can just give Gunnar a round of applause on doing all of this on a single income, because, and this is me just getting aside here, our society is really built. If you want all the toys, you want to do all the cool and interesting things, a lot of times that's two incomes, right? For the majority of people. And so just by the nature of this question, we know that Gunnar's deciding to make some sacrifices and to save a lot, right? So those are some awesome things that he's doing. The goals that I'm picking up out of this is he says, one, they like to optimize their financial position. They're looking to make the transition to the airlines easier when he moves from the military. So he's thinking about just buying a home outright in cash in order to do that. So I think the underlying question is, how should he go about to make that transition from military to airline easier? And, Gunnar, if you've been listening to the show, you've probably heard me say that during big transitions, cash is your friend, right? So as I listen to this question, there's a number of unknowns for me. Number one is, hey, which airline are you going to fly for after you leave the military, right? The other unknown is, what is the hiring climate going to be at the airlines in 6.5 years? We expect growth over the next 2 decades for sure. But will you be able to go direct to a major airline, or will you need to go to a regional first and then to a major carrier? The other unknown is, where are you going to want to live in the next 6.5 years whenever you get out? And then what's happening in the economy and also the real estate market at that time? And so when you think about buying this next home for $300,000, are you thinking that it's going to be a forever home? Or do you expect to live there for the next 5 to 7 years and then upgrade after that? So those are a lot of the unknowns or unanswered questions in my mind. Some of those may be known. Some of them probably I would expect a lot of those to be unknown for Gunnar himself. So here's my thoughts on this, right? So number one, as you make this journey, right, you and your wife are saving as much as you possibly can to optimize your financial future. My first thought is, hey, just make sure that you're celebrating your successes along the way, right? And let's make sure that you guys are enjoying this process, because you've got a pretty specific and pretty big financial goal on the front end. And so, you want to make sure that, there's sacrifices being made, but it's sustainable for you, okay? What can happen is you track that goal, you are successful on that goal, and then you get there and you're like, okay, now what? You realize that accomplishing that goal wasn't as fulfilling as you may have thought it would be. So just make sure you're enjoying yourself along the way. So let's get into the financial aspect. You mentioned cash several times. 6.5 years is a long enough time horizon for you to see your purchasing power being eroded by inflation, especially on a real estate purchase. So what I would do is I would look at some asset class that fits your risk tolerance, that fits the circumstances, risk capacity, and that will also give you a higher return than cash for sure. Even a higher return than a high yield savings, right? So 6.5 years I think is decent enough to do that. So dig into your options there. The other thing that I want to consider is, as you reach the end of your time in the military and as you make your transition, I would consider the questions that I mentioned before you buy a home outright. Hey, which airline? What's the hiring climate? What's the real estate climate? Is this going to be a forever home? And is this going to be my last move? Like, am I going to move in base, or are there going to be pit stops along the way? Because I think ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to decrease your burn rate, right? The amount of money that you require from a paycheck to meet your obligations. And there's 2 ways that you can do this. One is you can decrease your expenses. Like you've talked about, hey, if we buy this home outright, then I can cut my expenses in half. So you could do that. Or the other way to decrease your burn rate, which is required from a paycheck, is you can bring more assets to the table, that you can draw down on those assets, so then you require less income through your paycheck. And that's what you're in the process of doing, is building up this $300,000 fund. And so the moment that you buy the home outright, you do give up a lot of flexibility, because now your asset is tied up it's in real estate. So if your first stop is a regional, if that's not where you want to live, now you got to go sell the home and then you got to go buy another one, right? Or unless you rent the home. But if you want to get any equity out of it, you're either going to have to sell it or take debt out against it. Or, maybe you have your dream airline, but what if your number 2 or your number 3 airline is the one that hires you? Will you pick up and move there? So I think overall, I like the savings goal, but I'd say maintain as much flexibility as you can until some of those unknowns become knowns, and then throw the cash at the home, right? In the location that makes the most sense for you and your family. That's what I'd say, Gunnar. I hope that helps the way that you're thinking about this, and let us know what you decide. All right, so great. So that was for the first question. Lacey, what other questions do we have?
All right, so our next question is from Seamus. Seamus says, love the show. A question on life insurance. Good morning, Tim. First of all, thank you so much for your time and your efforts in hosting the podcast and helping to educate the community. My wife and I have always loved finance podcasts, and yours has quickly become a favorite. As a 32-year-old naval pilot beginning a transition to professional civil aviation, and a husband to a senior corporate financial analyst and a father of 2 young boys, it has been extremely enlightening and reassuring. If it's not too off the path, I was hoping to hear your thoughts on life insurance during an episode. More specifically, whole life insurance policies, not only as a legacy wealth tool for your family, but also as a qualified vehicle for retirement. I understand that it can be a valuable asset in a balanced portfolio that can provide excellent potential for growth and for tax-free borrowing to offset some non-qualified assets or those requiring significant mandatory distributions. However, the premiums tagged on to such policies can be steep and turn many folks away. As a, thankfully, healthy and relatively young adult, I am lucky enough to already have a policy in place, and I'm looking to understand and maximize its benefits. I want to be sure the juice is worth the squeeze, or if there's more benefit to looking at a go term and invest the rest strategy. Thank you for your time and consideration, and take care. Best wishes, Seamus. And this is perfect timing. I recently just got asked to update my policy, so I will be listening closely to your response, Tim.
Well, thanks for this question here, Seamus. And by the way, thanks for following along on the Pilot Money podcast. And, life insurance is one of those things where sometimes it's not fun to talk about and to think about, but it's certainly an important place in your portfolio and building your financial position. So let's dive into this. So let's see. So she says 30 military aviator going to the airlines, and specifically is talking about whole life policies for the tax-free opportunity. So essentially you can borrow from cash value that builds up. So a couple of things. Let's just bring everybody up to speed, right? So when you think about life insurance, there's term life insurance, which means, hey, you buy that policy for a specific term. It could be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. It's only in force for a specific period of time. And then after that time is up, if you're still alive, congratulations, you win because you have your life. And the insurance company also wins because they do not pay a death benefit. So that's the term. And then you can contrast that to permanent insurance, like a whole life here, where you have the opportunity to pay up that policy. And then when you pass away, even if it's 50 years from now, as long as that policy was paid up, the insurance company is going to pay out. They're going to pay out a death benefit. Another feature that permanent policies have that term policies do not is that permanent policies can accumulate a cash value. And that's what Seamus is referring to. It's this idea that you can borrow against the cash value to have tax-free income. And so the trade-off when comparing some permanent policies to term policies is that typically the permanent policy is going to have a higher premium. It's going to be more expensive insurance versus the term. You're going to get more insurance per dollar of premium paid. So you can think, bigger bang for your buck. And so a couple of things here. Yeah, I believe in insurance, right? But I do believe that when you think about financial products, you want to use the product that is best suited for the job. And so there's certainly a place for permanent policies in your financial position. I can think of a number of use cases for them. But in terms of being an avenue for tax-free growth, that's where I think that a lot of these policies fall short. So, Seamus said he's 32 years old, right? He's going to civilian aviation. So I'm going to assume that means airlines. I don't know if he's thinking about business aviation or airlines, but let's say he's going to retire at age 65. That means he has 33 years left in the game. If I'm thinking about accumulating tax-free retirement income, I'm thinking about Roth options, right? I'm thinking about that inside my TSP. I'm thinking about Roth options inside my 401k. I'm thinking about Roth IRAs. If I make too much, I'm thinking about doing backdoor Roth conversions. And then I'm also thinking about doing after-tax contributions to my airline 401k and then converting that to Roth. And I'm thinking about that because it's a very efficient way to generate tax-free income in retirement, because the costs associated with all of those are going to be much less than trying to generate tax-free income in an insurance product. And then also the returns. When you think about, is a permanent insurance policy the most efficient vehicle for tax-free income? It's not. And what I would encourage you to do, Seamus, is I don't know how long you've had your policy, but let's say you've had it for 10 years. I'd encourage you to compare the amount of premiums paid into the policy versus what your cash value is right now. And then do the same calculation to say, hey, if I had put those premiums in a Roth account, what would that value be? Okay. So neither the returns in the market, those are most certainly not guaranteed, but the interest credited in the insurance policy are not guaranteed either. But the accessing the market through a Roth vehicle is going to be a lot more efficient for you, and you're likely going to see a better outcome there. Now, do insurance policies exist for tax-free income? Yeah, they do, right? But, and again, I can think of a few use cases, but the policy would need to be designed specifically for it. And typically the owner is max funding it to the tune of 5-figure premiums each year for several years. And then they're letting the policy just sit for several years. And then they're taking out the loans, which means that their time horizon in comparison is fairly compressed. So I think in summary, when we think about a long-term investment, insurance is not the most efficient vehicle to build tax-free income. Particularly, there's other ones that would work, such as a Roth, or, if you get into physical investments, taking depreciation off and then offsetting future income streams that way by carrying forward those passive losses. So now you're thinking about, just tax benefits of certain investments and as it translates to tax-free income. But while we're talking about insurance, I think I'd like to bring up this point, kind of stepping away from the permanent insurance question and just thinking about insurance overall. As I mentioned before, it's not an exciting part of the financial plan, but it's a critical part to the financial position. And what I would encourage pilots to do is, hey, don't be lulled to sleep by the amount that the company gives you. The majors is anywhere from a little over $1 million at Delta, American comes in at $750, and Southwest comes in at $800, right? So these are, you show up, company says, hey, this is going to be the company provided policy. What you want to do is ask yourself, is this sufficient for my needs? And that's going to be based off of a number of factors like goals, liabilities, income, assets, and so forth, time horizon, all of these things. So you want to ask yourself, is this sufficient? If you determine that it's not sufficient for your needs, then what you want to do is you want to run the numbers to see if you should add to the company policy by doing the voluntary life insurance, or should you go get an individual policy on your own? A lot of times it makes sense to get an individual policy because your premiums are going to be locked in versus the voluntary group, right? Your premiums are going to rise with whatever age bracket you're in. Now, I have been pleasantly surprised at some of the business aviation policies that were better than standalone policies. But anytime that you don't control the policy, you're accepting a risk of future rate increases, right? So if that group started to have outsized claims, then, the insurer would come back and raise the rates on everybody. So run those numbers to see, hey, should I continue with the voluntary group policy or should I do an individual policy on my own? And the other thing too is, look, if you fly airlines and you don't fly GA or military, most insurers will be just fine. But if you fly GA or military in addition to your airline flying, then we're going to need to find an insurer that doesn't have an exclusion for that. Otherwise, you're probably going to get hit over the head for your military and your GA flying in the way of higher premiums. So, just be on the lookout for that. So Seamus, I hope this helps you think about different vehicles to generate tax-free income. Again, I would certainly encourage you, just run those numbers based off of how long you've had your policy, look at your own cash value, and then use a broad index just for simplicity's sake, maybe an S&P or a total market index, right? And say, hey, what if I put those premiums in the market and see, what the return would be from there? And then you could do some projections. So I hope this helps. And thanks again for following along on the Pilot Money Podcast. Thank you for joining this episode of Pilot's Portfolio. If you found this information helpful, spread the word and share it with a pilot buddy. Or if you have questions and there's something that you would like to hear discussed on the show, send us an email. You can find the address in the show notes. For those of you who are ready to learn how we help professional pilots with their financial planning needs, schedule an appointment. Until next time, keep the shiny side up, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Pilot's Portfolio is hosted by Timothy P. Pope. Timothy P. Pope is principal owner of 360 Aviation Advisors. 360 Aviation Advisors is a registered investment advisory firm regulated by the state of North Carolina in accordance and compliance to the securities laws and regulations. 360 Aviation Advisors does not render or offer to render personalized investment or tax advice through Pilot's Portfolio. The information provided is for informational purposes only and may not be suitable for all investors and does not constitute financial, tax, investment, or legal advice. All investments involve a degree of risk, including the risk of loss.